I hate intros, My Hero Academia Season 4, Episode 1. We kick things off with the introduction of Taneo Tokuda, who is a freelance journalist. He speculates that maybe All Might's message after his last fight was really directed at a successor. Juko News gets him permission to visit Class 1A since All Might has been spending a lot of time with them. He suspects that the successor is in that class and goes to find out who it is. Shortly after observing the class for a bit, he decides that the most likely candidate is Midoriya. Tokuda talks with Midoriya about a bombing at an industrial complex that took place 18 years ago. All 24 victims that were caught up in the incident were saved by All Might, and his dad was one of them, so he's a fan of All Might also. We learn that his quirk is whole body lens, which allows him to spawn a camera anywhere on his body, including his dick. He confesses to Midoriya that he wasn't actually there to observe the life of the students. Really, he was just curious if there was a successor to All Might for his own peace of mind. After returning back to work, he lies saying that he jumped to the wrong conclusions and didn't find anything. Episode 2. We hop on over to the villain side of things, where the new villain Overhaul is brought to the League of Villains so that they can convince him to join them. He has some different ideas though, and says that he wants them to work for him. This proposition escalates things to the point that Magnate attacks him, only to be killed by Overhaul's quirk. When others go to subdue him, Mr. Compress also loses an arm. Before there is any more casualties, members of the Shie Hasekai Yakuza come to Overhaul's aid, deterring any more bloodshed. Back on over to Midoriya, who requests that All Might introduce him to his old sidekick, Sir Night-Eye, for the work-study program the students have to take part in. All Might doesn't really want to talk to him because of some incident that happened in the past, so he has Tokuda take Midoriya to meet him instead. Before the meeting, Tokuda suggests that if he wants to get on Sir Night-Eye's good side, he has to make him laugh. We then meet a new face in Bubble Girl, who is the only other person besides Tokuda that works with Sir Night-Eye. But anyways, with this in mind, Midoriya opens with an All Might impression that actually just kind of pisses him off. Episode 3. Even though the opening was kinda stale, they're both All Might fanatics, so they kind of hit it off anyways. Midoriya is then asked to prove that he can be a part of the team by taking Night-Eye's stamp away from him. Sir Night-Eye's quirk allows him to see a person's future after touching them and making eye contact with them. Midoriya tries his best, but can't get the stamp away from him. Even though he failed the test, Sir Night-Eye was going to take him on regardless if he passed or not, so he officially joins the agency. This isn't for the reasons you'd expect though, as his plan is to make Midoriya realize that he isn't the most suitable successor to All Might. He believes that Tokuda is the ideal candidate, and that he was the one that should have inherited All Might's powers instead of Midoriya. The other students are struggling to find agencies that will take them on, but Tokoyami, Ochaku, Asui, and Kirishima all manage to find openings. Over to Midoriya's first assignment, where we learn that they are already investigating Overhaul and the Shie Hasekai. Episode 4. Night-Eye and Bubble Chick are watching Overhaul, so Midoriya and Tokuda go on patrol. While out, they end up coming across a little girl named Eri, who frantically runs into the two of them. Overhaul then comes out to retrieve the girl, acting like her father. The girl seems terrified, but they don't want to give away that they are suspicious of Overhaul. After Midoriya suggests that he might have done something to her, Overhaul says that he can explain, so they follow him. When he seems like he's about to get violent, Eri suddenly runs back to his side to deter his attack. Since they can't really do anything, Midoriya and Tokuda decide to let them go and report back to Night-Eye. They report back what happened, ending their first day of the work study on a rather ominous tone. Midoriya is kind of conflicted about having to let the little girl go, so he goes to talk with All Might. He confronts him about not telling him that Night-Eye knew how his power worked and was wanting All Might to pass it on to Tokuda. In response, he tells Midoriya the story of everything that had happened between him and Night-Eye. Even though typically All Might didn't take on sidekicks, Night-Eye was such a huge fanboy that they ended up working together. The partnership was dissolved 6 years ago after All Might's injury. All Might was in rough condition after his injury, so Night-Eye refuses to work with him anymore and wants him to retire for his health. Night-Eye looked into All Might's future against his will and said that if he continued like this, he was going to die a gruesome death at the hands of a villain. That interaction didn't really go over so well, so the two haven't really talked since then. Shortly after, the principal recommends Tokuda to All Might because he he knew he was looking for a successor. However, this is right around the time that he meets Midoriya and gives his power to him instead. After hearing that All Might had passed his power to a quirkless middle schooler, Night Eye was opposed to this. In response to this, he starts training Togeda in hopes of proving to All Might that he's a better successor than Midoriya. Night Eye had seen 6 or 7 years into All Might's future, but the further into the future he looks, the harder it is to see exactly when something will happen. His foresight has never been wrong though, and this means that All Might will die within this year or the next year. In the last scene, All Might and Midoriya agree to fight against fate and try to keep him from dying. Episode 5. We come in on a fight where Nejire works with Ochako and Asui to take down some villains. They are all working for the Dragoon hero named Ryuku, who is the number 9 hero in the rankings. She is the one that took on Ochako and Asui for the work-study program. Turns out, Night Eye had made a request for their 2 agencies to team up against Overhaul. Over to Tomura, who meets with Overhaul to discuss a possible partnership under the condition that they are equals. We don't really see what happens with that though, and then we hop on over to Tamaki, who agreed to help Kirishima get work under the hero that he works with named Fat Gum. During a fight, we see that Tamaki's quirk allows him to manifest characteristics of things he eats. This makes him a rather formidable hero, but the only problem is that he has cripplingly low self-esteem. A man with a gun suddenly appears and shoots a thumbtack-looking bullet at the heroes. This bullet was made by Overhaul and has the ability to strip victims hit of their quirk. Tamaki gets hit and can't use his powers, so Kirishima chases after one of the culprits. Once the guy gets cornered, he shoots up a drug that is designed to boost his quirk's power. Kirishima is forced to use his new move Unbreakable in order to prevent the new sharpened blades from cutting him. He can only maintain this form for 30 to 40 seconds, but in that time, he takes down the villain. Knowing that he's inevitably gonna lose, he tries to flee, but Fat Gum cuts him off and he is finally apprehended. We learn that power booster drugs that the man used are banned in Japan, and the most potent ones can last an hour. Episode 6. Midoriya, Ochako, Asui, and Kirishima are all heading to the same meeting. When they arrive, the big 3 are also there, along with numerous pro heroes. The heroes discuss the Shie Hasakai and how they plan on handling them. They also pass along the information of the drug that was designed to temporarily strip a person of their quirk. Eraserhead is able to nullify a person's quirk, but the drug seems to damage the quirk instead. Kirishima had managed to block a second shot during the commotion, so they found and studied that bullet. When studied, they found that the bullet contained human blood and cells, meaning that it came from someone's power, aka a quirk that can destroy quirks. We learned that Overhaul's quirk allows him to disassemble and restore things, being able to completely break down matter. They speculate that Overhaul is breaking down Aries' body into bullets and is planning to sell them into the black market. Not knowing where Aries is being kept now, they make a list of locations for the heroes to investigate. We also get the fun fact that one of the restrictions to Night Eye's power is that he can only look into one person's future every 24 hours. He also doesn't seem comfortable using it on any of the pro heroes after the incident that happened with All Might. After the credits, we see that Aries was assigned a new caretaker, but we don't really know too much about him. Episode 7. All of the heroes start their investigation on the locations mentioned at the meeting. After a couple of days, everybody gets a message that they've located Aries. Apparently, she's being held in a stronghold, which is also the residence of the head of the Hasakai. Night Eye managed to find the caretaker looking after Aries and uses his foresight to guarantee he is the one they're looking for. Everybody gets ready to launch the operation to retrieve Aries from the Hasakai. When they arrive, they encounter resistance from some of the henchmen, splitting up the heroes. Midoriya and Togeda are part of the team that rush inside the residence to find the girl. Episode 8. We get a flashback of Tamaki being an awkward kid that nobody really wanted to talk to. Togeda was the first one to approach him, which is how the two met, and he's looked up to Togeda ever since. Back to the present, where the heroes continue storming the residence and fighting off the henchmen attacking them. There's a villain inside named Irinaka, whose quirk allows him to go into objects and control them as if they were his own body. As they make their way into the secret tunnels, Irinaka uses a drug to boost his power. He enters the walls and turns the tunnels into a living maze. Togeda doesn't give a fuck about this, so he uses his powers to go ahead of the others while phasing through the walls. Meanwhile, the others are forced into a room where 3 villains Toya, Yu, and Soramitsu are waiting to stall them as long as possible. Knowing that's their goal, Tamaki volunteers himself to stay behind and fight them so the others can go ahead. The 3 villains quickly break free and start fighting back against him, now that Eraserhead wasn't around to nullify their quirks. Fight sequence ensues, and there's some back and forth before the 3 of them are defeated by Tamaki. Episode 9. He used neurotoxins on the villains, which are now circulating through their systems and will keep them out of the fight. Although he's not doing so hot either, so he falls unconscious. Over to the others, where Iranaka separates Fat Gum and Kirishima from their group, and they encounter 2 more villains named Kendo Rappa and Heikiji Tengai. Rappa's punches are messing them both up, which prompts a flashback into Kirishima's past. Mino is actually the one who inspired him to join UA after she was brave on a couple of different occasions. But anyways, the flashback reinvigorates Kirishima and he gets back into the fight. We learn that while Fat Gum is absorbing all of these shots, he's actually storing the power in order to turn it back on the assailants. Kirishima jumps in to block some of the punches and gives Fat Gum an opening to unleash all of the power that he had stored up, defeating both of the villains with one shot in the last scene. Episode 10. We see one of the new villains named Chronostasis, who is escorting Eri and Overhaul to make their escape. Rappa is too messed up to fight, but he acknowledges Kirishima's strength and wants to fight him again sometime. We get our first official look at the villain in the walls, Joy Iranaka, who decides it's time to use his trump card. The walls start warping again and begin to close in to crush the heroes. And while that's going on, Rappa explains that the only reason he's working for the Hasekai is because Overhaul was the only person ever to beat him. Overhaul had killed him with his quirk and then brought him back to life 5 times. After that, he realizes he's probably not gonna win, so he agrees to join him in hopes of one day beating him in a fight. Back on over to the others, where the hero Rocklock has the ability to freeze things in place, so he uses this to counteract the walls closing in on them. Midoriya kicks through the other walls that he can't get to, completely negating Iranaka's strategy. Once that had failed, he falls back to his next plan, which is to create walls to separate all of them. Rocklock is then ambushed by Himiko and Twice, who use their quirks to stab him. Midoriya can hear the commotion through the walls, so he breaks it down and finds Rocklock incapacitated. Eraserhead then breaks Himiko's disguise, revealing her as she attacks Midoriya. He manages to avoid the attack, but she did succeed in stabbing Eraserhead before making her escape. After that, she rendezvous with Twice, and it's revealed that they're only pretending to work together with the Yakuza, but are actually planning to make them pay for killing Magne. They then antagonize Iranaka, who goes into a rage in the last scene. Episode 11. We learn that Overhaul had perfected the drug, so now it can permanently destroy a perk instead of having it wear off. But back to the League of Villains plan, which entails using the heroes to get back at the Hasekai. This plan seems to work out pretty well because in Iranaka's rage, he accidentally reveals his position and Eraserhead nullifies his quirk. And while that's going on, Togeda had finally managed to catch up to Overhaul. Overhaul leaves behind 2 villains in Nemoto and Sakaki to deal with him. Togeda uses his ability to fight through them and get to Eri. Overhaul uses his perk to cut off his escape, forcing Togeda to fight back against him and Chronostasis. During the fight, Nemoto gets one of the perk-destroying bullets to shoot Togeda. He knows it's likely that he's going to be able to dodge the bullet using his quirk, so he instead aims at Eri. Togeda jumps in front of the bullet to protect her, and his quirk is destroyed. But despite that, he still immediately continues fighting back. In the last scene, he is stabbed by one of Overhaul's spikes, but before he is killed, Midoriya breaks through one of the walls. Episode 12. Midoriya, Eraserhead, and Night Eye bust into the room and immediately land a shot on Overhaul. Eraserhead is nullifying his power, but Chronostasis wakes up to attack Eraserhead, creating an opportunity for Overhaul to attack the others. In the chaos, Overhaul finds a moment to destroy himself and Nemoto, and then fuses together with him, which kills Nemoto in the process. Chronostasis had wound up with Eraserhead, where we learned that anybody struck by his attacks will have their movement slowed to a crawl. He also wants to take Eraserhead captive, since Overhaul has an interest in him because he can erase quirks. Night Eye orders Midoriya to look after Togeda and Eri while he fights Overhaul. During the fight, we learn that Night Eye is scared that if he looks into somebody's future, then he is dictating the course that their life will take. He fears that by using his sight to look into All Might's future, he may have inadvertently caused All Might's imminent death. This is why he feels so strongly about not looking into people's distant futures. But anyways, back to the fight. Night Eye is impaled and severely wounded, so Midoriya has to jump in to save him. Midoriya also gets impaled, and this leaves an opening for Overhaul to use Nemoto's quirk to speak to Eri. He convinces her to come back because if she doesn't, then he's gonna kill everybody. She reluctantly comes back and agrees to cooperate as long as he heals everybody that he had hurt in the fighting. Not willing to accept that, Midoriya pushes himself to keep fighting. We then learn that Night Eye had apparently looked into Overhaul's future and saw that he kills Midoriya and escapes with Eri. This cues the entrance of Ochaku, Asui, and Ryuku in the last scene. I'm gonna be doing part 2, and you can find that on the left side whenever I'm finished with it, or you can check out all the My Hero Academia recaps in the playlist on the right side. You can also find the links in the description below, and the only thing I hate more than intros is outros.